A huge thank you to all the super sponsors who make it possible for me to make these videos. Visit David X Newton on Patreon to join the ASCII Brigade. There is a famous joke I've been unable to find the origin of that says, "I'm not afraid of flying, but I am afraid of being 35,000 feet in the air and then suddenly not flying." Plane crashes are something you're likely to find yourself dealing with in OpenTTD, and they're particularly annoying because they're the only vehicle that can be destroyed without it being someone's fault. Trains will only derail if you haven't set up your signals correctly and smash them into each other, and road vehicles will only be destroyed if someone completely accidentally runs a train straight through them while they're on a level crossing. But if you use aircraft as part of your transportation empire, every so often, with no particular cause, you'll get a notification about a tragic plane crash that killed hundreds of people, but more importantly blocked your airport for a while and forced you to set up your route all over again. Let's take a look at why they happen. To start with, it's easier to talk about the things that don't have a direct influence on aircraft crashes but that seem like they should. Most surprisingly, the current and maximum reliabilities of an aircraft aren't involved at all here, and neither is anything else that deals with breakdowns. When a plane triggers the conditions that cause it to break down, the only effect is to make it slow down and puff black smoke until its next landing. Like breakdowns, however, the frequency of air disasters can be changed in the game settings under number of plane crashes. This value can be set to normal, reduced, or this time none star. The asterisk is there because there's one special condition we'll come to later, under which it's still possible for planes to crash irrespective of this setting. Planes also can't crash by hitting anything. There's nothing that checks for collisions with other aircraft in mid-air, and even if your airport is in the middle of a dense cluster of shops and offices, incoming and outgoing planes will permeate harmlessly through them. The only time it's possible for an aircraft to crash is by a random chance of botching the landing at an airport, irrespective of any obstacles that seem to be in its way. Before we talk about how these crashes do happen, we need to understand how OpenTTD's aircraft move, and the code we're after this time is in the function called aircraft controller in aircraftcommand.cpp. When it's approaching, leaving or otherwise interacting with an airport, an aeroplane or helicopter's movement is described using a set of states called airport moving data. Each type of airport has its own list of these in the airport movement header file, with each entry representing a destination in the takeoff, landing or taxiing process, depending on the locations of the gates and runways and helipads. There are 6 airports of gradually increasing size available by default in the game, plus 3 helicopter-exclusive airports that we'll set aside for now. The first available small airport, which is called Country in this code, has 22 different states which describe how to move to and from the 2 possible spaces an aircraft can load and unload there. At the other end of the scale, the Intercontinental Airport has 77 states, which cover its 4 runways, 2 helipads and 8 terminals. No matter how big the airport is, we're only interested in one line out of each of these lists, and that's the one with the AMED brake flag. This is the state that a plane is in when it's just touched down and is braking as it moves along the runway. A check in the aircraft movement code looks for this flag, combined with the plane's current speed being greater than the speed limit for taxiing, which is 50 speed units. If both of these are true, then it will call the less than reassuringly named function maybe crash airplane. Maybe crash airplane has to roll a random number that must come out as over a calculated threshold in order for it not to definitely crash airplane. Generating the random number is easy. It's retrieved in the usual OpenTTD way by making a random 32-bit number and then picking bits out of it. The code uses 22 bits out of the number this time, meaning we'll be working with chances out of 2 to the power 22, which is 4,194,304. Here's the code that works out the threshold that this randomly chosen number must exceed for an airplane to avoid crashing. First, it looks at the special condition mentioned in the settings menu, and checks if an airport's flags indicate that it has a short runway, and the aircraft's subtype flags include air fast. This flag isn't actually related to the speed of the plane, it's really whether it's designated as a large aircraft instead of a small one as seen in the details in the engines window. If this is a large aircraft trying to land at a smaller commuter-sized airport, the threshold will be fixed at 3,276 no matter what the crash frequency is set to in the game settings. There is another however on top of this however. The code also checks if the no jet crash setting is active. This is one of the cheats, recently renamed to sandbox options, accessible in the Ctrl-Alt-C menu. If this is on, the game will skip past forcing the plane crash threshold and will calculate it the same as for any other landing. The rest of this code is just based on random chance and the plane crashes setting, and there isn't anything you can do in-game to improve or diminish your chances. If the setting is 0, meaning none, then the code will return immediately and skip the check, never causing a crash. Otherwise, it will take the hex number 4000, which is decimal 16384, bit shift it to the left either once or twice according to the value of the plane crashes setting, and divide it by 1500. This works out to being 32768 or 65536 integer divided by 1500, meaning a threshold of 21 for reduced crashes or 43 for normal. If the selected random number out of 4 million comes out as lower than or equal to these thresholds, then the plane will be set to crash. So with these numbers we can now work out the percent chance of a plane crash for each condition. A plane has a 0.0005% chance of a crash on reduced and a 0.001% chance on normal. But if this is a large plane landing at a small airport without that special condition turned off, the chance shoots up to 0.078%, which is a colossal leap upwards from the normal probabilities. These numbers still seem very low though. With these figures, you would expect to be able to make about 100,000 flights on the normal setting before encountering a crash, and even attempting to land Concorde in someone's back garden should work 1,281 out of 1,282 times. And if you've played with aircraft for any amount of time, you'll know that your chances of a crash are definitely much higher than that. The trick is that the aircraft doesn't only check to see if it's crashed once for a landing. The conditions for the check to happen are true as long as the aeroplane is still in a state with the AMED brake flag and above the taxiing speed. This means that a plane has to pass the crash check on every game tick from when it first touches the ground until it either slows to taxiing speed or reaches the braking state's destination at the end of the runway. This alters our mathematics quite dramatically, and it means that the chance of an aeroplane crashing is now dependent on the speed it was going when it landed and the length of the airport's runway. For this video I've added the number of times a plane has had to take the crash check to the details window. The lower this number is, the better the chance of the plane surviving. If you swing this way, this is the formula for working out the chance of the plane surviving with respect to the number of times it's had to take the crash check, and this is what the results look like in the reduced, normal and runway too short cases. The chance of survival is an exponential decay, tending to 0 for all three cases once we reach about 1 million checks. However, the most checks we'll be dealing with is about 300, and this makes the formula look a lot more linear in our window. Note that in this graph I've set the y-axis to begin at 75% so that the difference between normal and reduced is even slightly visible at the top, so the red line for the special case isn't quite as dire as it looks. But it's easy to see just how much more dangerous large planes at small airports are compared to normal landings. So we now need to work out how many times a landing plane will perform a crash check, and this means we need to know how a plane decides on its speed. It's based on defining a target speed, or speed limit depending on the plane's state, and then moving the plane's actual speed up or down towards it. There are speed limits set for taxiing, approaching an airport, being broken down, circling an airport waiting to land, and an entry for regular flights that's just as fast as the plane can go. When adjusting the plane's speed, a speed limit can be treated as either hard or soft. If a plane is travelling above a hard speed limit, it will immediately drop its speed to match. But if the target speed limit is marked as soft, the plane will only reduce speed gradually until it reaches it. The speed limit applied when the plane is in the braking state is speed limit taxi, which is 50, and this is a soft limit. There is another complication here which I'll mention briefly but will then put aside until I really need to make our lives a bit more difficult. The speed of an OpenTTD aircraft usually doesn't match the rate at which it's actually moving. By default, planes are moved as if their speed were only 1/4 of the value reported, so that they have realistic values in the details window but they don't travel across the map at truly ludicrous speeds compared to all the other vehicle types. When messing with a plane's speed, the declared speed limit has to be multiplied up to be proportional to the displayed speed before calculations are run. For now, all you need to know is that this means the speed limit we want to reach during the braking calculation is actually 200, which is the declared speed limit of 50 multiplied by 4. This is the code for how planes slow down when they're above a soft speed limit, which looks a lot worse than it really is. On each tick, a plane will slow down by the square of its current speed divided by 16,384, and then divided by the plane's speed setting. Again, by default, the value for this is 4, representing planes travelling at 1/4 their reported speed. If this division works out to nothing, we'll just reduce the speed by 1. Using this formula, let's graph the landing deceleration out for the cheapest plane available, the Samsung U-52, which travels at 475 alleged kilometers per hour. From touchdown, it will take 212 ticks travelling along a runway to get down to speed 200. At the normal crash chance of 43 out of 4 million, there's a 0.22% chance that at least 1 out of the 212 checks will cause a crash. This means the chance of a crash is about 1 in 454, which feels a lot closer to what we experience in gameplay. However, something interesting happens at the country airport. This glorified garden shed has a runway that's only 4 tiles long, and that's not enough room for the plane to get down to the limit of 200. Instead, it reaches the end of the runway when it's still going at 253 km per hour, and then comes to an immediate dead stop. Contrary to expectations and logic, this means it's safer than landing at an airport with a longer runway. Reaching the destination takes the plane out of the braking state after only having performed 160 crash checks, meaning a reduced 0.16% or 1 in 625 chance of a fatal outcome. That's how it works for the slowest planes in the game, but there are 2 other possible plane speeds: the faster 952 km per hour planes and the supersonic ones at 2,329 km per hour. However, both of these types can be considered together because the approach phase of an aircraft's movement also has a speed limit which caps the incoming plane at 230 speed units. This means a speed limit of 920 km per hour on default settings, and so they'll both be at this reduced speed when touching down. This time the graph looks like this, with the line crossing the taxiing speed 286 ticks after landing. However, only the Intercontinental Airport has a long enough runway for the plane to actually get down to 200 km per hour. All the other runways will force it to cut off the braking phase, resulting in this pattern with the number of crash checks getting lower as the airports get smaller. All of these figures are slightly variable depending on exactly which sub-pixel of movement the plane was on when it started approaching the runway, but these are the most common values I saw from repeated tests. There's one deviation from the expected pattern here. The city airport is the same size as the metropolitan airport with a runway 6 tiles long, and yet it causes fewer crash checks than even the commuter airport with its 5 tile long runway. To find out why, we have to go back and look into how the airport moving data states are defined. The commuter airport's braking state has a destination that's 70 units away from its landing state, and the metropolitan airport has a difference of 86. But for some reason, the destination of the city airport's braking state is set to only 69 units away from the landing coordinates, making the runway even shorter than the commuter airport as far as the game is concerned, no matter what it looks like graphically. Just watching a plane landing at a city airport confirms the numbers here. It will always stop 1 clear tile before the end of the runway, unlike all other airports where the entire length is used. I'm really not sure if this is an oversight or some deliberate feature unique to how the city airports are laid out. Nevertheless, as we saw before, all of this results in the rather unexpected and unfair situation that a plane is actually much more likely to crash at a large international hub than it is at a medium-sized airport. The difference is very noticeable when you look at the city airport versus intercontinental. The city airport's 130 crash checks mean a 0.13% chance of disaster, with the intercontinental airport having more than double that risk at 0.29%. If we include the special extra risk for planes landing at a country or commuter airport that's too small for them, you can see the reduced number of crash checks doesn't cancel out the penalty, and that doing this is just asking for trouble. But this is just the beginning of the oddities with plane crashes. There's another variable we put aside at the start of the video, and that's what happens when the incoming plane has broken down. When the plane is in this state, no matter what its usual top speed is, it will be limited to going at 320 km per hour. To demonstrate the effects of this on the calculations, I've set up this airline in an altered game where all the planes are set to be perpetually broken down. The speed on approach is now low enough that for all airport and plane sizes, a plane will only take 120 ticks to reach the taxiing target speed. In some cases, at the bigger airports, this isn't even half the number of ticks a plane would have to endure when fully functional. The only situation where this doesn't give an advantage is for faster planes landing at country airports, which only have to survive 90 rolls due to them running out of runway so quickly. So remarkably, not only are shorter runways safer up to a point, but a plane is generally better at landing the more on fire it is. Now we also have to come back to the plane's speed factor setting. This wreaks havoc with these calculations due to the setting working against itself in opposite directions during the speed calculations. To show the effect, I'll run some examples again using a plane speed factor of 1. Now planes will actually travel at the speed displayed in the game, giving our slow Samson U-52 a lot more vigour in its step. As it prepares to descend to the runway, the plane slows down to approach speed. With a plane speed factor of 4, this was 920 km per hour, but now the speed limits don't get multiplied up when the calculations are run, so it dips all the way to the actual speed of 230 that's defined in the code. This is now slower than any landing plane we looked at before, even the ones that were engulfed in flames. When the plane touches down, it's now much better at braking as well, due to the plane speed factor having an effect in the speed limit formula here. The amount the plane speed limit is reduced on each take is usually divided by 4, but with a speed factor of 1 it's left alone. The lack of multiplying the speed limit serves to balance this out a little, as the plane now has to reduce its speed all the way to 50 instead of 200 to no longer qualify for crash checks. Despite the extra effort required, it makes it down to 50 on the 154th tick, enduring far fewer crash checks than it would have at the default aeroplane speed setting. In theory, on speed factor 1, all plane types and conditions would have the same number of crash checks per airport, because the approach speed is below all their regular speeds, and so they should all be going at 230 speed units by the time they touch down. However, with the faster planes now travelling at their true speeds, we have to take into account that the approach speed is also a soft speed limit, and that now they often don't have time to slow to it fully before they're on the ground. The amount of time that a plane is in the approach state is dependent on the angle from which it arrives at the airport, if it has to circle to wait for other planes to land, and even the definition of the flight path to enter the airport in the airport moving data. No matter what those variables are though, as usual in this universe of backwards physics and safety standards, the less time a plane spends on approach and the faster it's going when it touches down, the fewer ticks it has to spend going along the runway and checking if it has to crash. So the chances of fast planes crashing while going full throttle can be slightly to much lower than they would be regularly, but the actual figures can be highly variable. Once I saw a supersonic plane achieve just 49 ticks in the braking state by bearing down on a commuter airport at ramming speed, and with the large plane's special condition turned off, this results in the safest landing in the game at about a 1 in 2,000 chance of failure. After having witnessed all of this, it might be reassuring to look at the accident statistics for real-life aeroplane journeys to see how Transport Tycoon measures up against them. These are quite difficult to pin down because so much depends on whether you're only counting airlines that are regulated a certain way, or incidents that involve fatalities that didn't result in the plane being destroyed, and so on. Airbus has a yearly analysis of aircraft accidents on their site, and in their estimation, the 32 million flights made by commercial jet aircraft in 2023 resulted in no fatal accidents at all, giving them a crash chance of 1 in infinity. If we use the result from 2022 instead, this gives us a rate of 2 in 27 million, or a percentage of 7.4 times 10 to the negative 6. If jet planes landing at international airports were as accident prone as they are in OpenTTD, with a 0.253% chance of crashing, that year would have seen 68,310 planes rain down across the world, and nobody would fly or get into the aviation business ever. Therefore, very opposite from real life, flying is an absurdly dangerous way to travel in the OpenTTD universe, and everything that you might think could make it safer, like more spacious runways, controlling reckless speed and better maintenance, actually works against you. But there is one workaround in the form of the underrepresented helicopters. The sequence of states that they go through never includes the AMED brake flag, and even if they did, the code for helicopters takes a completely different route that doesn't check for it anyway. As there is no condition under which a helicopter can call maybe crash airplane, it renders them completely immune to crashes. So if you want to touch down at your destination alive in OpenTTD, that's the way to travel. Thank you to everyone listed here for supporting the creation of these videos. Please visit David X Newton on Patreon to join the community, see videos earlier, and get some bonus content.